Once upon a time, in a colonial land of rolling green hills and misty river valleys, there lived a young boy named George. Not yet the hero of legend, not yet the father of a nation, just a boy with bright eyes, holding a small hatchet in his hand, wondering what adventures life might bring. But this is not the story you think you know, for in the pages of history, truth and legend dance together like autumn leaves in the wind, and the real story of George Washington, well, that's even more extraordinary than the tales you've been told. Young George grew up in Virginia, where the scent of tobacco fields filled the air, and the promise of unexplored frontiers beckoned from beyond the horizon. When his father Augustine passed away, 11-year-old George's hopes for the same formal education his brothers received vanished like morning mist. But George possessed something rarer than book learning, an unquenchable thirst to understand the world around him. While other boys his age played, George taught himself the art of surveying, meticulously measuring and mapping the wild landscapes that would one day become part of a new nation. There is something fascinating about bringing order to wilderness, George would later write, to look at untamed land and see not just what is, but what could be. At just 17, George ventured into the rugged backcountry with his instruments. Can you imagine? A teenager navigating dangerous terrain, carefully documenting each hill and valley, each winding river and forest clearing. By 20, he'd become the official surveyor of Culpeper County, the youngest ever appointed. But as George mapped the land, storm clouds were gathering. Two mighty empires, Britain and France, both claimed the same territories. And soon our young surveyor would trade his measuring tools for something far more dangerous. What George couldn't possibly know was that the skills he was learning, reading landscapes, understanding terrain, planning methodically, would one day help him change the course of history forever. The forests of the Ohio Valley echoed with gunfire as George, now a young officer in the Virginia militia, found himself caught in the opening volleys of what would become the French and Indian War. His first taste of battle was bitter, outnumbered and forced to surrender at Fort Necessity. But it's not our victories that shape us most. It's how we respond to failure. With each setback, George's resolve only strengthened. He watched and learned from British generals, storing away lessons both good and bad that would serve him decades later. When revolution came, the Continental Congress turned to the tall Virginian. "We need someone who can unite us," they said. "Someone we can trust with power because he doesn't seek it for himself." Picture this moment. George Washington, standing before them in his militia uniform, humbly accepting command of an army that barely existed, facing the world's mightiest military power, with farmers and shopkeepers as his soldiers. "I shall try to discharge the trust," he promised quietly, "but let every man remember that success depends on how well we stand together." The war tested them all. Harsh winters at Valley Forge where men left bloody footprints in the snow. The daring midnight crossing of the Delaware through ice floes and howling wind. Imagine standing in that boat, the bitter cold biting through your clothes, the weight of an entire revolution on your shoulders. Washington stands tall at the bow, his face set with determination as they push through the darkness toward a battle that must be won. When all seemed lost, Washington would not surrender. Perseverance and spirit, he told his freezing, hungry men, have done wonders in all ages. And against all odds, they won, the impossible victory achieved. But what happens next is perhaps the most remarkable chapter in this most remarkable story. In history, generals often seize power. King George III said, "If Washington resigns, he will be the greatest man in the world." At Fraunces Tavern, officers gathered. Washington raised a trembling glass. "With love and gratitude, I take my leave. May your future be as honorable as your past." Tears fell as soldiers embraced their leader. Then, unlike most, Washington surrendered power and returned home. But the nation struggled. The Articles of Confederation were too weak. Again, they called on Washington. "I've already declined twice," he said. "Without you," they replied, "there may be no United States." At the Constitutional Convention, Washington's calm leadership shaped a new government. When it was time to choose a president, he was elected unanimously. As president, he set lasting traditions, peaceful power transfer, and service over rule. After 2 terms, despite pleas, he stepped down once more. Washington wasn't flawless. He made mistakes, faced doubts, and learned. That made him truly great. In retirement, watching the Potomac, did he know his greatest monument was not stone, but the principles he helped build? His story proves heroes aren't perfect. They're real people who choose service over self. So when you see his face on a coin, remember, Washington changed the world, not through power, but by giving it up. He helped to start a story that still unfolds today.